Hey everyone, welcome to episode. Brandon, you know the episode number?
I don't. I don't even know our names. Like our branding and our names aren't up today. So we
You
are
know
at
while you're here?
72, right?
83.
83. You know what?
Episode
I'm
number
sorry. I,
three,
I,
83
I actually, I thought 82. I don't know why I said 72. 83.
of Mastering Modern Selling. That is what we call this, Brandon, just so you know.
Yeah, thank you.
It's
Like
fun.
I thought I was going to place an order at McDonald's here for a second. That's how my day's been.
Anyway, welcome. Good to have you. Sorry, Carson's not with us today. I know he has some family things he's taking care of, but we have another
Yeah.
awesome guest, David Priemer. David, welcome.
Hey, great to be with you here. Thanks for inviting me.
Can I do this?
Oh yeah, good product
Yeah.
placement. Just do that
Good
for the
problem.
whole show, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's better than my face. But hey, Tom, do you mind if I kick this off a little bit?
No, please, please.
And I'm going to go off script. So I found David's book, and this is his older book. He's got a new one coming out. We're going to talk about that as well. But I read this book and I couldn't put it down because I kept going, yeah, yeah. You see all my dog ear pages and my notes and everything. And go, oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I got to remember that. Oh yeah, that's right. What I love, David, is you took all of your experience and you've got amazing experience, but you've turned it into something very logical and practical. And I feel like a lot of times books and consultant speak is very rigid, like, oh, and this is what, and in a real world situation or in a in a in a classroom or when you're writing things up on the whiteboard, it all sounds good. But this got back down to a lot of practical stuff for me. Like just remember the fact that there's human beings on the other side and they don't want to be treated any other way. Is that a fair way of kind of summarizing my fanboy speak?
100%. Well, my gosh, where do we start? I mean, this all came to be when I was working at Salesforce. So I was just, like Tom, I'm a startup sales guy. Did these 4 tech startups, and my third one ends up getting acquired by Salesforce, which is how I got to work there. And I used to run at Salesforce at the end of my tenure there. I used to run small business sales for the Eastern US at Salesforce. So I had all these like young, enthusiastic sales reps. And what I found was the tactics that they were executing in the field, not unethical, not categorically ineffective. But as a VP at Salesforce, people were prospecting into me all the time. People wanted to sell me stuff. And so I found that a lot of the tactics that people were using on me were things I was having no part of. I wasn't answering my phone unless it was an internal call that I could see. I'm not responding to cold outreach on email, LinkedIn, anything like that. And I'm like, my team is doing the same thing. Like the same thing that I'm not responding to, that's what they're doing. So I kind of went back to I was a research scientist before I got into sales many years ago. And I said, you know what, there's got to be a better way. So I took it really intentionally in terms of like figuring out like what are the pathways and mechanisms by which human beings make purchasing decisions. How can we ironically use science to be more human in our sales interactions? And that was the catalyst for this journey.
Yeah,
So,
that's
hey,
good.
I have a couple of questions, and yeah, aloha to Bob. Good to see
Yeah,
him
let's say
as well.
shout outs.
Um,
Shout outs to Bob and anyone else. Hold your thought for a second, Tom, because I got so excited, I skipped the beginning where you'd say, welcome to everybody. Put in the comments, where you're from. Please join with comments and tell everybody, put your comments in because David's going to be a great source of information. So I'd love for you all to participate and
for
get you
sure.
involved.
So David, what year were you at Salesforce? Like roughly when was that when you were there?
2012 to 2017. So when
Okay.
I joined, Salesforce was about 6,000 employees. And when I left, they were about 24 or 25,000 employees. And
So
now they're
you were there right at the heart of the predictable revenue craze, right? I mean, predictable revenue, Aaron Ross's book, that came directly out of Salesforce. How, and I assume that was a key part of your playbook, or was it part of the playbook at the time? And how did you mold what you were finding with the predictable revenue playbook?
It's funny. So I'm a fan of the predictable revenue playbook. That was something that we started implementing at the company before I worked at Salesforce.
Okay.
But here's kind of like the big problem and where I focus and where I continue to focus. It's funny because now when it comes to sales technology, there's all these tools. There's like AI this and personalization at scale and all these things that we can do more so than ever before. And yet the data shows that it's actually taking more connection attempts to interact with a customer than it ever has. The average age and experience level and tenure of a new salesperson is lower than it's ever been. And so the data shows that we're worse at sales than we were before, even with all of the all of these things. And so I said, it's great that you have all this technology, but at the end of the day, for any kind of sophisticated sale or big considered purchase, it involves a human being talking to another human being and some kind of discourse happening and a decision being made. Even if you use technology to figure out like what their phone number is and who to reach out to, all that kind of stuff. So it very much comes down to that human interaction. And that's where I spend a lot of time. What do we say? How do we describe what we do? How do we do good discovery and handle objections and negotiate and doing all these things? But there's like a very human element to what I do. That's in my view, like that's the frontier. That's the biggest problem that we need to solve as a sales community.
So was that more where you were going with the previous book, or is that more on the latest book? Or tell us a little bit about your books and kind of what the key points were. And of course, we'll talk about the latest one here.
Yeah. So the first one, Sell the Way You Buy, was all about kind of like the science and empathy, these science and empathy-based sales tactics. So like number one, don't use tactics that wouldn't work on you, but also like be really curious about the pathways and mechanisms, as I said, by which human beings make purchasing decisions. When you say it like this, they get it. When you say it like that, their eyes glaze over and they don't get it. So that's really what Sell the Way You Buy is all about. And I kind of put all of the tactics that we think of in sales, from messaging, like discovery, objection handling, through that lens. Because, and we were kind of talking about this in the pre-show. One of the reasons why sales get such a bad rap is because we go out there and we execute these tactics that are based in nothing other than this is the way we've always done it. Like this is just the history. In my book, the first chapter in Sell the Way You Buy is called the Cobra Kai Paradox, which for many people, I'm 48 years old. So when I was 9, the movie The Karate Kid comes out, and I love the movie, but it tells a story of these like jerk bully, kids that learn karate from this, person who teaches them the wrong way. And they're not bad kids. They're just doing it because that's what someone told them. And so that's what we've ended up with in sales. We just do things like we were talking about off the top, this robotic language. Like we send people emails using words that human beings don't say to each other because that's what our marketing department gave us. And like, isn't that the playbook? And the answer is like, no, you're talking to another human being, like sound like a human being. And it's funny that we have to, teach people how to do this. Anyway, so that's what Sell the Way You Buy is all about. The sales leader they need is a little different. Bob feels old now, he was saying.
Yeah. Don't worry, Bob, you're probably not that old. So, when did this book, your first book come out? So
it came out at the height of the pandemic of April 2020. Okay. You spend a year and a half writing a book, and then you don't know when it's going to come out. But it was really good because all of a sudden sales became really hard at the beginning of the pandemic. And even, then it became easier as people started investing, especially in B2B technology, in cloud technologies, because we couldn't see each other and all that kind of stuff. And it got a little easier. And unfortunately, that tends to obfuscate some of the challenges that we actually have with our sales motion. And so now you're seeing, especially in the last couple of years, as sales has gotten much harder, the stuff that used to work doesn't anymore. And so a lot of organizations are going back to the drawing board saying, shoot, like we can't run those old sales playbooks anymore because they just don't work, right? And so the appetite for these new tactics has been great.
So we talk about this all the time, but I'm interested in your take. Why do you think sales has gotten harder?
Well, when you think about just adversity in the market, unless you were selling in 2008 during the last financial crisis, like everything has been kind of up and to the right-ish, since then, especially in technology with the growth of cloud technologies and companies migrating, like everyone is looking for these new solutions. And in general, people have money to spend on these solutions. But now it's getting harder because, with recession fears and rising interest rates, company budgets are getting tighter. Some of this stuff is actually, legit, in terms of, downsizing and layoffs and all, but some of it is preemptive fears. We can't raise money, or we can't. And so what's happening now is companies don't have as much money to spend. There's like the fear in the market. They're trying to do more with less. And they think to themselves that the problems that they're encountering aren't so hard. They can just solve them on their own. It reminds me of in my younger days, when we get starter home, expecting our first kid, and like leaky faucet. I'm like, oh, I can fix that. Like why not? Like, I don't want to have to pay someone to fix it. So I convinced myself that these are things that I can do. Right. And so that's what you're seeing now in the market, in the face of all these solutions, and the number of solutions in the market is, I give this example all the time. In 2011, there were 150 marketing technologies available on the market. Now, 2023, over 11,000. Like, it's grown by 70 times. And so as a buyer, like, I don't know how to pick these solutions anymore. And so buying has become a lot more complex. Budgets are a lot tighter. There's a lot of fear in the market. And so it's not so easy if you're one of these niche vendors. It's not like before where, in the glory days, early 2000s, there's only so many solutions on the market. Now there's like a million solutions. So how do we as sellers help our buyers navigate this complex environment where they don't have a lot of money and they think they can solve all their problems on their own? That's why it's so hard now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah. I was going to say it's the this whole ecosystem that we've all been a part of is interesting. There's so many things coming together. So the startup culture, the VC, the angel investor, all of that, the greed of capitalism, of people think they're going to start a company and become a unicorn. Even the fact that we have the term unicorn speaks to what's going on. It's created all kinds of noise. So it's made selling harder for everybody. And then there's this new thing out here that people like to forget about, is the buyer journey has changed because buyer tools have changed, right? We as you said earlier, I think it was during the show, maybe it was in the pre, but we don't take calls from people we don't know because there's so many calls coming into us. We don't pay attention to cold email because there's so many emails coming into us. And so we've got these fears, some warranted, some just emotional fears of we're not going to be able to raise money, interest rates are going up, da 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 da. And we've got this old school mentality, and we've got what I call old school and old school. We've got the most recent old school over the last 10 years of this, I believe, an anomaly that these tactics even worked. Messaging at scale, cold calling at scale, and that even worked. And now we've got this inflection point where all these things are coming together. And there's just this collective, oh shit moment and a lot of non-decisions because people are scared. They don't know what to do. Do you guys think that's a fair assessment too, based on what David was saying?
Yeah, I think, and I heard you say a couple of things, David. I do agree, right, that the macro level conditions are obviously very different now than they were 2 or 3 years ago, especially in the tech space, which was fueled by a lot of external money. But I think what you also said, and we talk a lot about this on the show, is the noise level has gotten higher and higher and higher. So you have to be way, way more intelligent and creative to rise above the noise, right? And even if you were buying a lot, even if the economy picks up, the noise level with AI and all these other things that are going on. I mean, look at social, Brandon. I mean, LinkedIn is getting noisier because of AI and some of these AI things. So social is getting noisier. Everything's getting noisier. We've got to cut through that somehow and rise above the noise. Is that what I heard? I think that's what I heard you say, David, is kind of a key part of the message in the book.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things I talk about in the book, my last company was focused on what we called advocate marketing, which is this idea that from a conversion rate perspective, if I make a recommendation to you, we're friends. I'm like, hey, you know what? You know who I went with for this solution? I went with, this company. You're just going to go with that company. Right. And so like these kinds of like trusted recommendations convert at a much higher rate than, web and social, all that kind of stuff. And so, yes, like the way people buy has certainly fundamentally changed. The other part of it as well, and there's like, again, this is why I love sales, because it's so nuanced. Like there's so many, it's like an engineering equation with so many variables with all this like margin of error. part of the other challenge is that as these solutions get more niche and they get more complex, and the average age of a salesperson gets lower. One of the things I talk about in the book, and I wrote an article in Harvard Business about this 5 years ago, was this phenomenon that I noticed, that when you take a young enthusiastic salesperson and you give them like a high-tech solution, and you tell them, go call grown-ups. I don't mean to use an unnecessarily juvenile example. Go call grown-ups, call the VP of sales, call the VP of marketing, call the CIO, call grown-ups whose job you've never done. And I want you to tell them with a high level of conviction about how you're going to lead them into the future. That's a recipe for disaster. And you know what? It's funny because when I used to run small business for the Eastern US at Salesforce, I would have these reps, my New York City sales reps. They always hustled the most, tons of calls, tons of emails. And I would have these reps that would have lots of activity, lots of flourish, and no pipeline. So it's like, well, what's going on? And they're like, I don't know, David. I'm doing all the things that you're telling me to do. So I would start listening to their calls. And if I always say this, I'm like, if I close my eyes and I don't even care what the words are, I'm just listening just to listen, just to hear what they say. And I'm like, you know what you sound like, Tom? You sound like you're bothering this customer. You sound like one of my kids when they're about to hit me up for something that they think I'm going to say no to already. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can hear the fear. A couple of years ago, my daughter was on the volleyball team at her high school, and she comes down, she has this early morning practice she needs a lift to that she totally forgot about. She comes down, she's like, Dad. And I'm like, the answer is no. Immediately, I'm immediately defensive.
Forget it.
And so your tone, your approach, your conviction, your confidence plays a huge part in your ability to convert customers. And yet, what we arm these, and I say kids, but it's really everyone, like salespeople with, is marketing speak, all sorts of crap that your customers don't care about, especially when all of the other vendors in your space go out and they have, we're just like you. Like we say the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so when a customer can't figure out what to do, they just shut down, especially in the face of this lack of conviction.
So it sounds like, something I've been saying, and I believe to be true, and maybe I'm FOS, I don't know, but it's over the last, say, decade, we've not trained a whole lot of salespeople. Now, a lot of our customers, they're either Microsoft partners, and they tend to be full cycle AEs. They're in manufacturing, and they tend to be full cycle AEs. And then there's some people in the tech space where, our first job, like my first job in sales was, I was a full cycle AE. I had a small territory, and I had small types of companies where I couldn't do too much damage, but I got to learn everything. And I had to learn how to build rapport. I had to learn how to ask questions, and I got coached and trained and did all that. But I was kind of in a playground where if I made mistakes, it wasn't going to be a big challenge. I feel like a lot of this in the tech space anyway, with SDRs, they haven't really been trained to sell. They were trained to, I don't even know if I want to call it prospect, because it was this weird anomaly of the way that you prospected to try and get people into a demo. Is that accurate? And if so, how is that playing out now when companies are, the data shows lots of SDR teams are just getting and off they go?
Well, they're inefficient, right? I mean, it's not that the SDRs completely don't work, but the cost of the SDR and the efficiency, if they get one meeting every month or something, that's not really an efficient sales model, right?
But my point is, they haven't really learned how to sell, have they?
No.
So as we go into this next season and they think, I've got 5 years of sales experience, do they? Like, do they really? They have SDR experience. Like, if you're going to what I would call, quote, kind of a real company with full cycle AEs, I just don't think that they're prepared, because it's a different motion. Like David, you were saying, they're all prepared with, the product specs and value propositions and all that, but they're not prepared to say, hey, Mr. and Miss Customer, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, they're not prepared to have like those grown-up conversations, because again, like what we arm them with is like a very rigid script and a lot of product training. Like, and they believe, okay, if we just talk about like the product, they're gonna, did you know, that we have this platform that will enable you to do it? And like, no one cares. Like the customers live in the world of problems. And we, as salespeople, for whatever reason, we tend to live in the world of products. And then we just, we try to pitch the product, as well as the fact that a lot of the SDRs, like, they're younger. I mean, this is like, it's the entry level sales job. And in many ways, like the hardest job in sales, we tell them to call, again, grown-ups, learned customers, to talk about how we can help them. And we arm them with product related information. Like, that's the recipe for disaster. Now, there are certain tactical elements of, like, how do you get someone on the phone, and like, what do you say in the voicemail, and like, those are things we can for sure teach them. But if you ask me, that's not why, if you're telling me an SDR is being unsuccessful, it's probably not some of those tactical things. It's really like the meat of what they're saying. Like, are you saying something that makes me want to lean in and say, this is really interesting, tell me more.
Yeah. So Tom, let's transition to some of the comments, and then I want to move. I know a big portion of our audience too, David, is not from the tech space. They're not SDRs. I want to move into, and I think it's a lot of the content from your new book about how are we leading and training salespeople to be successful as we come into the trite term of the new normal, but it's just true. We've got this new environment in front of us. Buyers are different. The way we can communicate with them is different. We don't have as much face-to-face. New. So, Tom, which comments do you want to bring up?
Because you definitely have some fans here, David, from Melissa.
Hi, Melissa. Good to see you.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever been told we're intelligent, Brandon. This is great.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
I've been told I think I'm intelligent, but that's different, right?
And then I like Butch or Bob's comment here saying, yes, it seems to be getting harder, but the root cause of the problems are still human problems, right? In other words, the problems that we're trying to sell against or to spotlight today probably have a lot of similarities to the things we were doing 10 years ago, 20 years ago, just obviously manifesting in a different way. I think that's a really good point. And I want to, Butch, he's reminded that he was in sales 30 years before Salesforce. So he's definitely OG of the group here. And I want to hit Chris's comment as well is, he's right? What Chris is saying here is these concepts make so much sense. No wonder it's so damn hard. Right? It's just very simple.
Oh yeah. I say, like, if sales was so easy, we'd be paying high school students minimum wage to do it, instead of, really smart people a lot of money to do it successfully, because you have to balance like all of these variables. It's kind of funny. Like, I think about this and anyways, I have some new concepts brewing in my head, but when you think about one of the problems that exists in sales today, a lot of people think that they can solve their own problems. Like, oh, I can fix that leaky faucet, or I can rewire my house, but you really couldn't. And it's because of a psychological principle. It's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, which tells us that the skills that we need in order to be really good at something are the same skills that we need to know that we're not good at that thing. So, for example, you might watch an Olympic swimmer on TV, or someone who does a sport that you used to do. I think we were talking about Brandon, badminton used to do, or
soccer.
Shoot,
soccer. Yeah.
But so you watch
badminton.
Soccer on.
Who plays badminton?
There was a client I was talking to who's answered the question, said badminton. So I'm like, all right.
I didn't know, Brandon, you were into badminton.
Yeah. So that's going to be a new thing. But so Brent says, well, I used to play soccer. So, we talked about this. So, you ever watch soccer on TV and you think to yourself, like, I know those are pros doing this thing, but
I can do that.
I could do it. Like, I could hang with them a little bit, right? And the reality is, like, you're nowhere near close. I think you were saying, you kick the ball halfway across the field and someone traps it, underneath. And like, that's really hard, but it looks really easy when they do it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's really what modern selling is. Like, when you see it done really well, it looks like nothing. It looks like just a human being having a conversation, right? But there's actually a lot of variables and number crunching and all sorts of things that are happening beyond, in the background that make it look so easy, right? But it's obviously because I said off the top, the reason I love sales, it's like an engineering formula with so many different variables with margins of error. I'm going toe to toe with you. I'm trying to prospect into you. You just had a fight, with your spouse that morning. Now you're on the phone with me. Now you're in a bad mood. Like, I can't control that, right? But yet, I have to handle it. So anyways, that's one of the challenges.
In that nuance, like I can't remember where I read this, and if it's in your book, tell me. It was somebody, they had a first conversation with somebody, and they got on, and because they didn't go right into their pitch, they said, well, how's it going today? What's going on? And the person said something about an issue kind of going on with their family. And basically, the entire time they had allotted was just being a human and responding to this person that was going through some potential big distress, empathized with them, and really didn't have the conversation that they wanted to have. And at the end of it, the person said, you know what, I am so sorry, we used up all the time. Why don't we schedule another time next week and give you my attention? And then the next week when they had it, that relationship was so solidified because they displayed empathy. They made, like, hey, my time, they treated the person like a human being in need, not like a prospect and a number to close a deal. And they ended up closing a deal. Now, obviously, you like it when the story ends with they closed a deal. But those types of nuances, they come from experience, and they come from being properly trained to actually care about people on the other side, and not just, here's our playbook, go do the playbook. We know the buyer's fully in control, and yet so often run the playbook instead of adapt to the human.
100%. A lot of times we have these things that we, like a list of things we need to get out of the initial discovery call. We need to know the budget, the timing, the this, the that, who's going to be the decision maker. You're not going to get all that, right? It's better to get as much as you can, prioritize what's most important, but have that human conversation. Because this might actually be kind of a good little segue into like the second book. So the second book is called The Sales Leader They Need, and it's all about it actually takes a very similar approach to Sell the Way You Buy, but just for sales leaders. So, with Sell the Way You Buy, it's science and empathy. Don't use tactics that wouldn't work on you, and be really curious about how it all works. With sales leaders, one of the questions I ask the sales leaders that I train in my practice, and I say, like, can you picture the best sales leader you ever had? And people, they can usually pick this person out really fast. And then I say, tell me, what was it about this sales leader that made them the best you ever worked for? What was it about them? And then I go to the whiteboard and I write down everything they tell me. And I've done this hundreds of times, so I know what the answer is. And everything they tell me falls into two main categories. Category one, which I would argue is probably the most important, which is they cared about me, right? They challenged me, they pushed me, they believed in me, they were transparent, they coached me. Like, they did all these things not because they were trying to get me to hit the quota explicitly, but because they cared about me as a person. And number two, they helped me grow. And then I asked these reps, I'm like, what kind of rep did you show up as for this leader? Or I asked the leaders, like, what kind of rep did you show up as for the best leader you ever had? And they would say, oh my gosh, like, I would run through a brick wall for Brandon. I would do anything. Like, I didn't want to disappoint him, right? And so I say to these leaders, like, you already know, if you want to be the best your team ever had and unleash that discretionary effort from them, like get them to try really hard, you already know what you need to do. Then the question, so care, that's it. The same thing happens with your customers as well. Like, they can tell if you're just trying to make the sale or you actually genuinely care about helping them find the right thing for them, which may not be your solution at the end of the day, right? They can tell. And they will always come back to you, just the way the sales reps who value working with that leader will always come back to them. It won't be the last time they work with them. And so what I tried to do in the second book was codify, all right, so if you want to care about your team and help them grow, what are the 5 skills that you need to be doing to learn in order to become that leader? So trying to, very similar, that's the way kind of my research scientist mind works, is to try to codify things to make it easier for people to figure out.
So are you up for sharing some of those 5 things?
No.
All right.
Yeah.
I had to ask.
Can I throw this before you go? Because I do want to transition. Bob Britton was a little late to the comments on talking about Sell the Way You Buy for us, but I would like to come back to that at the end if we have time, and if not, maybe we carve out something, because I think that's really interesting topic. But I do want to move on to the leadership side for today. So Bob, thanks for that, and we're going to do our best to get back to it.
Yeah. So we'll talk about this. I was just kidding, obviously, about the leadership behaviors. So some are easier than others. I talk about creating transparency, driving accountability, protecting and advocating for your team, coaching them, and giving and getting feedback. Some of these things are obviously universal, good leadership traits to have, but applied in a sales context, there's a lot of specific use cases that are really important. So, as an example, one of the things is I say transparency. When all you're doing is you're giving people orders, and for many of us, in sales leadership roles, we got here because we were good sales reps, right? And so, we often think that if we just flex those muscles again and help our teams be really good at selling and just tell them what to do, because we have a lot of the answers, then that's the solution. But the problem is when we just tell people what to do. And by the way, I always like to temper what I say by saying, like, you might agree with what I'm saying, you might not, but there's data and science to back this up. I don't want to be in a position where I say, oh, here's what you should do because this is what I did. Like, that's the Cobra Kai tactics. We want to get out of that. So this idea that if we can show people the impact that their efforts have, they'll be more intentional about how they go about them. So for example, simple transparency example, as a sales leader, one of the things that you're asked to do is present the revenue details of the revenue operation to the executive team, to your board of directors, whatever have you. And what I want the team to do is be really diligent about completing the fields in the CRM. I need you to keep Salesforce, HubSpot. I need you to keep that stuff up to date because, if I go to the board with incorrect information or like lies, that's not good for anyone. And so what I would do is when I would ask my team members to okay, keep your stuff up to date, I would pull all of their forecast data. I would put it into my presentation. And before I went to the board, I would say, hey team, here's what, your data, here's the data I pulled from Salesforce. And here's the story I'm going to tell, right? Right now, I don't believe this. I don't believe that. And the reason I don't believe it is because I see the average age of the deals in the pipeline are 3 times longer than what our average sales cycle is. So when you tell me we have 5x coverage next quarter, I don't believe you. I don't believe you're trying to intentionally deceive me, but I think you've just pushed deals out there that have no business being there. So this is like the kind of straight talk dialogue I would have with my team. I'm like, I want to show you what I'm going to show the board. And I want to show you the story that I'm telling. And I also want you to know, here are the decisions that are going to get made based on this. So if I can give you more insight into how the business runs, what I'm going to do with the information that you're giving me, by creating some of that transparency, I can get you to act with more intent.
Do you find this is an interesting point because you hear this a lot, right? Is that even as marketers or salespeople, we have to act more like a business person and less as a marketer or less as a salesperson. Do you find, David, with your clients and what you do, that when that transparency occurs, that you see the sales team acting more like business people, thinking more does it sort of organically transfer over by just the behavior of that sales leader?
Yeah, 100%. If I can give you insight into how the business runs, you're not just going to do things robotically. You're going to do things with the right level of intentionality, and you're going to be able to moderate your behaviors. Even little things I talk about, transparency and even accountability is showing people what good looks like. If I say, you Tom, I need you to keep your stuff up to date in Salesforce. What does that mean?
Phone
let me
call.
show. Yeah, well, it's let me show you what a good next step looks like. Here are the things of a good next step. When you tell me, hey, David, my opportunities are up to date in Salesforce, I want you to. Here's what that means to me. It means that these 4 fields have been updated in the last week. There's a timestamp on this. I want to set you up for success. So if I ever ask you to do something, I love Bob saying this here. It's more helpful to know the why than just the what. Absolutely. Giving people that background is really important. But then also the what and being very clear on what the expectations were are important. So you have that gold standard to shoot for, and there's tons of examples of how, sales reps go into their sales motion and unknowingly do bad or screw something up, not because they're, ill-intentioned or they're lazy. It's just that we were never clear on, what good looked like in this instance.
Hey, David, that makes me think of this question. What should salespeople be doing or saying or asking of their leaders as they come into this, as we've established? There's just headwinds, there's all kinds of new stuff in front of us. What should the sales team be asking?
Yeah, well, look, I think a lot of salespeople want feedback. They want to be coached. They want to be good. It's funny in my
Yeah,
practice. I know a lot of people don't want to be good, but a lot of people do want to be good, and they want just like the. I don't again unnecessarily juvenile example, but the child wants the parent's attention. Like I want you to tell me, how can I be better at my job? The ride-alongs, the feedback. So I think that's something that's very reasonable. Like if you want me to be good, you have to invest in me by giving me
yeah,
some of this, feedback and coaching. And also like clearing the roadblocks for me to be successful. So if there's something that I feel is limiting my ability to be successful, then as the leader, kind of your job is to block and tackle for me. Right. Now, it's usually the
mhm,
leaders who are, should be taking more of this initiative saying, hey, Brandon, like, what's one thing I can do to like clear the road for you to be more successful? But not unreasonable, certainly, for reps to be
yeah.
asking this of their leaders.
Yeah, and that reminds me, we hear a lot. I hear a lot because we do so much with LinkedIn and a LinkedIn first motion. Um, there are a lot of sales professionals that say, "Gosh, I wish my CEO would be more active on LinkedIn. It would help me build my personal brand when I have my CEO doing it." And the analogy is like when we go to an event, we go to a conference or a trade show. When our CEO has a large network at that event, my job gets easier because people know my CEO, their reputation helps open my doors. But when they don't have a reputation, then it's like I'm fighting upstream. And so just, asking those things of your leadership and then of course hoping that they'll be receptive versus saying yes and not doing anything.
100%. Although I would argue that the majority of the onus, I would love, for reps to be empowered to say like, hey, look, leader, here's what I need from you. But I think the onus falls much more on the leader. You
Yeah.
chose this. You
Yeah.
didn't have to do this. You chose it.
Yeah. I agree with you. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of sales producers that are in teams that if they don't ask for it, they're not going to get much of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that's why you wrote your next book.
So I have a question. I want to tie into Kathy's comment here. Kathy was saying it's about revenue responsibility versus quota. Words matter, and salespeople need to understand why they matter as much as why the products matter. I want to talk a question related to revenue responsibility. Do you find, David, that and you talked about transparency and even how to best practices for putting stuff into Salesforce, but do most organizations even have a consistent definition of an opportunity and how that opportunity, either velocity wise or percentage wise, is actually going to turn into revenue? Do companies even understand that about their business so that the sales leader can transform or be transparent with their team on how that actually plays out?
Yeah, I mean, the quick answer is no. I mean, some do, but even if they do have a definition for what an opportunity is, oftentimes there's a disconnect in the handoff between teams. The marketing leads always suck, and then the SDRs aren't qualifying the right opportunities, or maybe sometimes they're like if I'm I've seen this as well. Like I'm a buddy with the SDR who gets comped based on how many opportunities they flip, so I kind of accept opportunities that maybe aren't in the strike zone. And so, yeah, there's tons of inconsistency, and it makes it very difficult for these different parts of your organization to communicate with each other and move these opportunities forward.
I
100%.
mean, I would think getting your shit together on that part of it and really understanding your stages, what your close rate, your velocity rate, where is a high intent, that really sets a foundation to understand that business aspect of things like you were talking about before. Because think about it, what are they taking to the board meeting, right? They're trying to take opportunities or actually qualified pipeline. In my book, the very first chapter, the reason I wrote the book was I went to a board meeting and I looked like an idiot. And I was like, what the hell happened here? And I didn't want to go through that again. And that's where I did all the research that I ended up putting in my book. So I feel exactly what you're talking about. And I think it's a bigger and bigger problem all the time of really just understanding is, as she said, what is the revenue responsibility and how do we actually achieve that? And I think
Hmm.
a lot of organizations don't really know.
It's funny. The chapter 4 of my book where I talk about driving accountability. I started with the first section is, preparing for the board meeting, because exactly what you said, when I prepare for the board meeting, or, if you're out there like presenting in front of the executive team, they don't just want to know what the answer is. They are judging you
Right.
and your suitability, Tom, to be in that role.
Right.
Right. And as an aside, it's funny. I invested in my last VP sales role. I invested in this analytics package that was expensive, that I only really used once a quarter when I was going to present in front of the board. And the reason why I used it was because it gave me insights into my business that I couldn't have gotten any other way. So I was willing to pay a bunch of money to look smart in front of the board because they're judging me. And I wish that my team felt a little bit of that pressure that I felt. I think if they felt that pressure,
Mhm.
they would try harder, in their roles to get the right data to me.
Mhm.
And so this transference of accountability is actually like a really important concept. Like, how do we hold our team accountable? And I think one of the great kind of, works of magic of great sales leaders is that they know how much of the, oftentimes we get a lot of pressure from the boards and the executive team and the investors. And we go to the team, we're like, team, you got to like try harder. We got like the board's breathing down my neck. And we just transfer 100% of that, that pressure to the team. So knowing how much of that pressure to transfer and
Yep.
by what mechanism is really
Yep.
important. But I do wish that they felt that level of a little bit more accountability than they do, like the way I felt.
No, I think it's awesome. And when I wrote about it in the book, where I got the punch in the stomach is one of the board members or people in there said, "How confident do you feel about what you just presented?" And I was like, uh, you know, and I couldn't answer the question. And this wasn't my first rodeo either, right? I've done a few of these before, but I got to this point. I was like, man, I don't feel like I can back up what I'm talking about here. And that was sort of that shift that you were talking about, the COVID era, things getting harder, the buyer journey, all these sort of perfect storm of things coming together. So I'm a big proponent of what you're talking about, of that transparency and accountability, and getting the team involved in the business, not just in the, as Kathy says, the quota of what they're doing. So
100%. Well, it's funny. I'll give you like both a leadership tip and a sales tip, because I talk about this in my discovery training. Is I say the concept is sell more by losing faster. And what do I mean by that? When I look at the amount of time in real life at Salesforce and the company after, the amount of time that my sales reps are spending in the discovery phase of sales cycles for deals they ended up winning versus deals they ended up losing, I found that they were spending like 3 times longer in this discovering for deals we ended up losing. And why? Customers go dark. We can't get the executives on the phone. Like, they're just giving us the signals that they're just not that into us.
right.
But the reps that do a better job of saying, hey, you know what? Like, they're just not that into me. I'm not going to focus on them and just focus on like the newer high potential opportunities. Those teams and reps actually did better. They had higher levels of attainment because they weren't focused on all of these distractions. So I use this as an example of, kind of what we're talking about, like here, like execution, looking at the data and saying, like, I don't believe that these opportunities that you're kind of stashing out 3 months from now, I don't believe they're real, because look at how long we spent like in the discovery phase of these things, right? And so, having some of that real talk, using data, keeping our teams focused, driving some accountability, will actually have an impact on our bottom line. But yeah, it's like this, very simple kind of common sense thing. Like, just, use data, transparency,
Yep.
focus to achieve the goal that you're looking for.
And Brandon, we've seen, right? Obviously, this is the focus of Fist Pump. We've seen that the quality of the opportunities that come through the social, the relationship building, or whatever, are of much higher quality, much higher percentage close than something that came in through a, MQL, a traditional sort of MQL.
Yeah.
So I think it's also really valuable to not only understand what you just said, David, but what is it, where these quote unquote leads are coming from. And a lot of times that can probably act as certainly a lens into, is this discovery going to go way off base or take forever? Or, right. You can look at a lot of variables and tell whether or not this thing probably has some legs or doesn't.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Yeah, like I sometimes refer to these as like the physical chemical properties. It's like, judging by like this piece of data, that piece, this doesn't smell like a deal that's
Yeah.
actually
DNA of
gonna.
this is not really too good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just simple sniff test, and I think a lot of times we don't have the freedom to be able to do some of the simple sniff tests. But what I hear you saying with that as a sales leader is and encouraging them and looking at the data and show like, hey, our longer sales cycles have a higher loss rate. What's going on here? Like, what's happening? And it's logical when you start unpacking it that way. Like, the harder they are to get the information out through the discoveries and the harder they are to get back to the next conversation to go deeper, probably not a high priority. It's not a high priority. They're really not that interested. Maybe they're acting out of a little bit of courtesy, but either way, it's going to waste your time.
But
And look,
Brandon, let's even go back to how we started this with noise, right?
Yeah.
As time is never your friend, because time just opens up the opportunity for more noise
Yeah.
to get in that you now have to overcome. So anyway, sorry, David, go.
No, like you can use data as well, like in a even if I'll give this example because I give this example in the book. So one of the sales leaders I coach, he was trying to get his team to do more prospecting. Of course, sales teams, they like the nice inbound leads. Like, I don't want to have to get on the phone or do all the prospecting. So his team was like, no, we're just going to work the inbound leads. And they're like, well, Brandon, like, the inbound leads, they close faster than the outbound leads. So why would I focus on the outbound leads? So what does he do? He gets into the data and he says, yeah, it's true. The inbound leads close 17% faster than the outbound leads, but the revenue from the outbound leads are 83% greater. I forget what the statistic, whatever it was compelling. And so all of a sudden the team's like, oh, okay, well, when you put it like that, like, again, we're being responsible for the revenue and the leading indicators and the behaviors that drive that revenue. Sometimes we can use data to kind of, soften the minds of our teams and get them to move in the direction that we want. Even, insofar you talk about like forecasting, when we always have to kind of, beat our reps over the head to like get all the crap, all the stuff that you pushed out into future, quarters, like you got to get that out because here's the downstream impact on our business.
Yep.
And, I always use this litmus test, back when we were at Salesforce, as I said, okay, like take one of these little opportunities you pushed out. What if Mark Benioff called you into his office and said, Tom, this opportunity, this one here, tell me about that. Why is this one closing 3 months from now? Could you defend, to your point, like to your board experience, like how confident do you feel in this, Tom? Like how much could you defend, what's going to happen? And for most of us in sales, there's like a very thin veneer of confidence where we just either say things or we actually don't know. And our customers can tell if we believe or don't believe in our solution, just the way our team members can tell whether we know what the hell we're talking about as it relates to, improving our sales motion, or we're just like.
So I've got a common theme through our conversation. If you're asked about your confidence level in some sort of sale and your answer is, it's not a good thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And one of the reasons why people sometimes don't have confidence is because all we do is we train them on like products. Like, here's the product. Like we don't train them enough on the problem. You think about when you go into the doctor's office and the doctor has seen a lot of cases like yours and they have a lot of knowledge, like you develop lots of confidence. You want to go back to that doctor. You don't want to have someone who you just like, oh, well, I got this machine that I plug in and it tells me A, B. Like, if you don't have the knowledge or context or conviction behind what you're saying, then why would your team and why would your customers believe you?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back, Brandon, or do you have another? You want to?
I do. I've got a question on. I love you're saying go back to the data and let the data tell the story. And I honestly, I get into some data with customers we talk to, but how common is it for leadership to be able to not just be able to, but how often do they actually go and look at the data and have these types of conversations and let the data motivate and tell that narrative to help the sales team understand what their world really looks like?
You mean like internally?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not enough. I have a section in my book that I call "Let Data Do the Hard Work," as it relates to driving accountability. And so, oftentimes we're like, oh, Brandon, you got to make more calls. Tom, you got to do more of this. Your conversion rate, like, And so like, why do I have to, as a leader, why do I have to have these conversations? Can I not use data, that I give you visibility into to help self-moderate your behaviors? So yeah, we don't use data enough. We don't often use data in the right way. And the great thing about data is that it's impartial. It's like science. It is what it is. I'm not, and I can deliver it without, imposing my, personal emotional bias on it. Like if I said, hey Tom, I noticed that you're kind of like near the bottom of the leaderboard as it relates to the number of prospecting calls that you're making every week. Like what's going on? And I can kind of prove out why making that number is important. But yeah, a lot of organizations don't use we use simple data like, oh, you're not hitting your quota, you're behind on this. But there's actually a lot more we can do in some of these nuanced examples, like I gave around, the speed of the sales cycle versus the revenue associated with it. Or, for example, one of the things that we used to look at a lot at Salesforce was install-based deals or new business. Yep. So we would say, reps love to sell products and services to existing customers because it's easier.
Sure.
I'll sell you a few more licenses here and there, a new product. But we also knew at Salesforce that for every dollar that we bring in, within 18 months, that dollar is going to turn into $7 of expansion revenue. So Brandon, when I say last month that 90% of your revenue came from the install base, that's great. You hit your number last month. But why I'm concerned is because if you keep doing that, that trend continues, you're not going to have enough new business to feed your quota for months to come. And so like a lot of that like more nuanced data is also really important in terms of driving behavior, just not just like the top line stuff.
Yeah, I like this is interesting. Butch's comment on there, Tom, is whose team's second most important measure was cost of aborted transaction. It really gets, again, let's look at the data and make the awareness of the time spent, the cost loss, the opportunity missed part of the culture and things that we talk about. How often should a leader be talking about those things, or am I off base with thinking that that's an important part of culture?
It certainly is, and it's funny. So as I was doing this research for Sell the Way You Buy, I was working with Shopify, and one of my friends and sales leaders at Shopify, she was telling me that one of the metrics that they track on their dashboard is what they refer to as TTL, time to lose, and it's a metric that tells us like basically how much time we're wasting in opportunities. And the idea is like if we're going to lose, I want to lose quickly. The worst thing I can do is lose slowly. But in fact, like the even worse thing than that is losing slowly and not realizing you're losing, which a lot of people do.
Yeah.
But like I want to optimize my sales machine, not just for wins, but also losses, right? And so when every deal is precious, we often think, oh, we need to hang on to it. They said call me back in 6 months, so I might as well just push that opportunity, down the field. Meanwhile, like no, like we should be optimizing for losses. If someone's not a good fit, this is again what my data showed. My New York City sales reps, who are much more ruthless with their time, had a much larger proportion of fresh pipeline that was like less than 60 days old versus other teams that had lots of 90 plus day old pipeline that was kind of sticking around. And my New York City sales teams had much higher attainment because they were just more focused. So optimizing your funnel, not just for wins, but lost time is really important. But I'll tell you, I have not seen a lot of organizations do that.
I think that's huge. I think that's, now more than ever, I think that is a very, very key strategy. Because if you are going to invest more time, more relationships, more energy, more intelligence into the qualified deals, you can't be wasting your time with the ones that aren't going to win. So you've got to put your attention on the ones that really matter. Right. And so getting the ones out of the way, and plus the hope, it's all this hope stuff, right? That's where confidence goes away, is where the hope factor comes in and overtakes the actual real data. And, that's what I saw, that when I really looked at it, that when I debugged that board meeting, I had a lot of hope and not a lot of confidence. And that had to switch very, very quickly.
Defensibility is an important, like, okay, so you have a lot of hope. Prove to me or defend why this deal is going to close. If you can't,
Yep.
As they say, hope is not a strategy. So, yeah.
And it, again, we come back to data and information as a motivator, right? If we're looking at this from the data and let the narrative show, like, hey, these deals don't tend to close. Here's the data to show it. It should also be a motivator and almost a coach to help the sales rep navigate the process better. Like, oh, my slow deals have not been converting. They've been slow because of XYZ reasons. Let me go make sure that those things aren't happening earlier in the stages, so I'm not dealing with another slow deal that it doesn't resolve. Does that logic follow, guys, or am I? No, I'm just confusing everybody.
No. I think it's reasonable to look at what the data is telling you, like at every stage, of the sales process. So yeah, at the beginning, if it's taking too long to run through discovery, people aren't being lined up, the customer's ghosting you, like maybe like the chances are they're not that into you.
Right.
So we should act accordingly. It doesn't mean that we should completely jettison and abandon the deal, although in some cases we should, but we should act accordingly. The other thing is, I would say, like, salespeople can also be more prescriptive, and I talk about the power of prescription a lot, because we're like the doctors in this doctor-patient relationship. So, it's incumbent upon us to help our customers, navigate this process as efficiently as possible. If I talk to a client that I know is going to, like, so I'll give you an example. In my practice, I'm grateful to have lots of nice, big, software companies that I work with and smaller ones. But the big software companies, oftentimes if I go through like the regular channels, like let's talk to the enablement team and let's talk to that, like that's the slow road to failure. In order for my larger client, engagements to be successful, there needs to be a leader who stands up and says, we're going to do this and I'm going to figure out how to fund it. And I'm not going to go through the regular channels because I know that's the slow road to victory or failure. If I'm talking to a big company and we're having these initial conversations and I'm not getting the sense that leader's going to stick their hand up and say like, yes, I want this to be done, then my spidey sense goes off and I might say, hey, Brandon, like typically, I found working with big companies, if we go through the proper, like all these channels, like it's just going to be the slow road to failure. All these people are going to want to get involved and it's going to take a lot. It's kind of like the way I would handle against an RFP process where a company says, we want to go through an RFP. I'm like, that's like the slow road to whatever, and here's why. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to make these connections internally. You're going to be told this. You're going to be told that. Like, do you think that we can navigate through this somehow? Because like, I know the way this movie's going to end. And if I'm not getting the feels that we're going to be able to, navigate our way to the finish line, then like maybe this isn't the opportunity for us. So I think salespeople have a great opportunity to do that with their customers. Is like be prescriptive. And like, if you don't feel like it's going in the right direction, like feel free to like challenge the customer on why it's not. And I say, Kathy has a point here.
Well, that you just answered her question, I think, perfectly. Right? That's how you make the conversations more productive, is make them more prescriptive. And then the fear factor kind of goes away.
And I would also say, Kathy, which I think is a great point, because I talk about this in the Sales Leader They Need. I say, like, people, when they fear consequences, they're less likely to, to act or to give you the truth. So the example I give is like, my kids, when they were little, we would like to wake up on Saturday mornings and make waffles. And so one Saturday morning, I wake up and I hear this big thud in the kitchen, and I go down and there's like a chair that's like pushed up against the cupboard. And there's like a bag of chocolate chips on the floor with like 3 kids that look guilty as hell sitting there. And I come down and I'm like, who did this? And of course, exactly. It's like, oh, no one did it. Of course, like no one can remember what exactly happened. I don't know. It's like, I have no recollection of this happening. And so the reason why their memories all of a sudden disappear is because they fear there's a consequence. They think, well, Dad's going to be angry if they find out who it is. So what do? Like, I take that fear away. And I say, hey, look, I'm not angry. I just need to clean this up. And so I would appreciate if someone who may have been involved in this, like, if they could just help me. And then all of a sudden I get like, some hand raisers, right? So, Kathy, I know it's a tricky line to balance here, but, when salespeople have a fear of failure, yes, they tend to hang on to things for too long. But if we make it okay, like, I want you to give up stuff that you don't feel is a good fit, or at least let's talk about it. like the consequence isn't there, or at least the fear isn't there, then we can have that much more open relationship. Like you can play relaxed, So I think that's really important. If we want to make these conversations more productive, we have to kind of, look, sales is it's a winning and losing game. You got to put up the numbers, but it's not all about the numbers. If we can reduce the consequence of that fear of failure, then people will be more likely to kind of lean in and do what's necessary to be more effective.
I think as we wrap up, Tom, I think one of my big takeaways from today is going to be that make not failure, but make the conversation around loss and the cost of loss part of the conversation so that it empowers people to move bad deals through quicker and just, get to it. As you say, lose faster on deals that don't pass the sniff test, and be okay. Instead of the fear of failure, go, I got to do everything I can to try and salvage it. When you kind of know, like, this isn't going to go anywhere, let's kind of move. Let's go ahead and ask these harder questions and just kind of get the shit out on the table so that we can go, yep, it's shit. Let's move on, and be okay with it. I think that's my takeaway from the day.
I think you're right on. I mean, what on a really good salesperson is batting 1 for 4, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the other 2 out of 3 that you want to really understand, to really learn and get better. So I think that's a great.
It reminds me of my old Brian Tracy training, and now that I'm saying it, I should have known this for lots of years, and I probably did and then forgot it. But we'd say you start to get to a point where you know your numbers, and like, hey, it's going to take me 24 of these to make a deal. So when you get your 5th no, you're like, sweet, let's go get number 6. Let's go get number 7. Let's get there. So the 24th one becomes a yes. And it's motivating.
Absolutely. David, awesome stuff today. Some really good nuggets in here. This is one worth re-listening to for sure. If somebody wants to get your book, find out more about your consulting, where should they go?
Yeah, I mean, the books are all available on Amazon. It's probably the easiest. There you go.
Sell the way.
I don't have the other one. I don't have the other one, or else I'd have it up here because it's not out yet, right?
Well, here. So okay, here I'll do the product placement for you. So here it is.
Go.
It's technically out May 1st, although between us, it is available on Amazon now. Don't say that too loudly, but it is available on Amazon now. So you can get them on Amazon, and then for the rest of the stuff, I give away tons of stuff for free. It's all mostly ungated. You can go to my website, cerebralselling.com. YouTube channel by the same name. Tons of articles, videos, content, free training for you to digest from there.
Awesome. Brandon, I think Carson's going to be really sorry he missed this one today. This would have.
I think so too. Carson would have had a lot of fun with David.
Yeah. So we're going to have to do it again with Carson.
Carson's our sales producer for Microsoft, and so he brings a different lens to it and really gets into from the producer standpoint.
Right on. Well, we can do it again. I just got to write another book at some point in the future, and then we'll do another one.
Well, no, we'll come back and talk about the other book when I have it in my hand.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah,
looking forward.
All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks everybody for the comments. Great comments today. Good questions, David. Good luck with the book, and everybody have a good week.